The Entei event has ended, and there are a number of loose ends I want to tie up from a research perspective. In this video, we're going to cover two. The first one is how many of you actually saw wild legendaries during this event. And the second one is an update on the chance of Entei mains dropping from your community research from your friends. Now, this Google form was available for the last 24 hours. If you've been following my channel for the last 2 weeks, you'll notice that neither myself nor Piggy or any of my alt accounts had encountered either of the wild legendaries. Were we just really unlucky, or were we part of the majority? And it seems like the majority of people never encountered any wild legendary Pokemon. So the red here, 60% of people never saw a wild legendary. About 30% of people actually saw wild Entei, which is really interesting. And then about 5% of people actually encountered wild Raikou, which is also interesting because the chance of Raikou and Entei appearing shouldn't be that different. Their drowsy power requirement is not that different. However, during this event, of course, fire types have a boosted rate to spawn. So I guess it's not surprising that wild Entei had more chance to spawn than wild Raikou. Although it is about 6 times more than Entei. And then about 2.5% of people encountered both wild Raikou and wild Entei, which is very unbelievable. Now, you can't actually use any of these statistics in any way. You can't say that, well, during an event, there's a 30% chance for a wild legendary to spawn. You can't use it in that sense because these numbers don't account for the individual's drowsy power. For example, you could not encounter Entei until you meet a minimum drowsy power requirement. And so therefore for new players, generally you're not really going to see Entei as a wild spawn. And since this statistic doesn't differentiate people who have enough drowsy power versus those who don't, this statistic is completely useless if you're trying to determine the odds of you encountering a legendary during an event. But it's still a nice graphic to see how many people actually encountered wild legendaries. And I think that's more than what I would have expected, given my own experience from both events never seeing a wild legendary. I do apologize that green and purple actually mean the same thing, but due to a typo, they've been counted as two separate data groups. Just look at purple as part of the green statistic. I'll leave a link to the Google form if you guys want to continue to contribute the data in the comments section below, and I'll leave it up for another week because after that, well, memory starts to fade and people might not remember exactly what happened during the event, so we're not going to collect any more data after that. Now, remember in the last video, I talked about the chance of community mains being given. And we saw that, well, just like in the previous event, it's ideal to stay at closeness 5 and have as many closeness 5 friends as possible because you would on average get about 26-27 mains per day if you have 50 friends who are closeness 5, which at the time I thought was a bit low compared to a Raikou event. But in contrast, for closeness 0 to 4, at the time when we had just about 1,000 reports, well, the numbers were a lot better than the Raikou event. Now that we've collected a lot more data points, and we're talking about multiple thousands of data points, have the numbers changed? This is the raw data analysis, but I will give you a very easy to understand graphic in a moment. But first, let me go through the actual data. So after our complete data analysis of over 6,000 data points for closeness 5, the average mains per day that you received didn't change that much. And it makes sense because we always had enough data points. So our initial data was actually very accurate. Things did change. We did get a much more accurate analysis after receiving more reports for closeness 0 to 4. For closeness 0 to 4, we had about 500 to 1300 data points per closeness level, and our end result showed us that on average they hovered around that 10% mark. In other words, for any friend that is not closeness 5, you have about a 10% chance to get a batch of mains from those people. Of course, you should know that at closeness 0 and 1, you will only get one main per batch, whereas at closest 2 and 3 and 4, you would get 2 mains. So if you multiply these numbers by the 10% chance of getting a batch of mains, well then at closest 0 to 1, on average, you would get about 5 mains per day from 50 friends who are closeness 0. Same as closeness 1, you get about 10 mains per 50 friends at closest 2, 3, and 4, and 27 mains per 50 friends at closeness 5. Our actual data range from about 10 to 12% for those closeness levels, with about a 2 to 3% uncertainty. So just for simplicity, I would say that's just a flat 10% between 0 to 4, and an 18% at closeness 5. So then I asked Banana Tanks to make us a graphic that displayed that in very simple terms. The chance of main drops from your friends is 10% for closeness 0 to 4, as I said before, but of course the amount that you get each time you receive a main goes up as your closeness goes up. But it's a step ladder increase, as you can see, because if you have 50 friends of the same closeness level, you would get 5 mains at 0 and 1 closeness, 10 mains at 2 to 4 closeness, and 27 mains at closeness 5. And if you just remember these numbers for a moment, 5, 10, and 27, how does it compare to our data back at Raikor's event? Now note that for Raikor's event, our data was much less accurate because we didn't have enough resources and time to do this research. And also I was doing everything manually, whereas for Entei, I had everyone submit their report by themselves, which allowed us to get a much bigger sample size. Regardless, we hardly saw mains at all at closeness 0 to 2. It wasn't impossible, it was just very, very low. You'd be lucky to get more than 1 or 2 mains per day if you're at 0 to 2 closeness. The chance of main drop was anywhere between 1 to 3%. It only went up significantly at closeness 3 and 4, in which you approximately got 10 mains per day, but then it went up more at closeness 5 at about 32 mains. Now I'd say 32 mains is pretty accurate because we still had about 1,000 data points at that time. The inaccuracies were for the lower closeness levels. If we were to compare that to what we got for Entei event, it does seem like community research gave less mains in the Entei event than the Raikor event. We are about 90% certain that that's the case. So in conclusion, mains from community research was increased for people who had more friends with closeness 0 to 2. It was about the same for people who had most friends at closeness 3 to 4, but then it got reduced at closeness 5. Although having said that, the amount of closeness 5 friends that you would have for the Entei event should be bigger than the number of closeness 5 friends that you had during the Raikor event, because you had more time to build those friendships. There is one question I have left about Entei spawns, is I have yet to see anybody report the possibility of encountering 2 legendaries in the same sleep research session, whether it be Raikor or Entei or both, and whether you use an incense or not. And it makes us think that perhaps it's not possible to have 2 legendaries spawning at the same time, much like how you can't have 2 legendaries used on the same team. Or perhaps the odds of actually encountering 1 legendary to begin with is just so low that perhaps encountering 2 legendary is not really realistic. A huge shout out to /Burner who helped me collect and analyze the data from the Entei mains research, and also the people who submitted the most number of reports for the Entei mains research. They're Condamore, myself, Matcha, Gridola, Teddy Buckets, Katesium, Dino Sachi, Marit Watery, Roots, Milvin Hyder, I don't know if I said that right, Ace Slider, Kabukehod, Mumuda, Riker, Chardizzle, /Burner, Doho, Jelly Belly, Mellows, Amariz, Sir Breakalot, One Disciple, Dizzy Dodo, Sturgeon, Ash, Midori, RRM, Axel Chen, Dr. Croxus, Sir Balance, Orgrim, Catherine, Carence, Buisland, or possibly Weaselland, Stop Alcatraz, Simon, Husky, D-Suck, Tamaraz, Davis Steven, etc. Don't forget to rewatch this video before the Suicune event. Thank you for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well.